Memoirs of an Invisible Man is a 1992 film. This is directed by John Carpenter. It's written by Robert Collector, Dana Olson, and William Goldman, based on the book by H.F. Saint. I haven't read the book. I don't know how it compares, but if you have any thoughts on that, please feel free to share. And I wanted to watch this because I love Patricia Heaton. She is in it slightly, a tiny amount. And it also sounded really interesting. It's about a man who becomes invisible, and I will talk about that in a moment. But unfortunately, I found this to be really dull and a little bit of a disappointment. At the start of the film, well, near the start, it was a little bit slow, but at some point in the beginning, Nick, played by Chevy Chase, becomes invisible. And yes, the reasons behind it makes sense. I liked the setup. I thought it worked well. I was convinced that this would happen from a science perspective. And then he spends the rest of the film, first of all, trying to cope with being invisible, but also with running from the CIA who are trying to capture him. And honestly, the narrative is incredibly boring. It is mostly quite slow. There are a few times when it's not too bad, but in general, I felt like I just spent the film waiting for something interesting to happen, and it never did. And there are two other reasons why I don't like it. One is a personal preference thing, but one is definitely a disappointment. I was expecting so much more from the special effects, especially for a film in the 90s, and it just really let itself down. There are a couple of okay moments, but in general, I was expecting something a lot better, so that didn't really work well. The other reason I really found this to be so irritating, but this is personal preference, is the constant voiceover narration. It's the style we see with classic detective stories where the detective's narrating things over the action, and it's just so annoying. I've never liked it. I probably never will like it. So that's not necessarily something that's at fault with the film, but personal preference means I really do not like that at all. I find it very lazy as well because you're telling instead of showing, and it's just really unnecessary and very irritating. So I hated that, absolutely hated that part of it, but that certainly is personal preference. Not a lot happens, and yet we seem to jump around a lot as well. It's definitely a very busy film, and yet there's not a lot of substance to it. Special effects were really lacking and not at all what I'd expected for this kind of film at this time period. The performances are fine, no issues there at all, and I guess the characters are okay, the character writing not too bad. I can't comment, of course, on how it compares to the novel. If you've read it, sure, I'd be keen to know if it's similar or better or worse, but with regards to the film, I thought Memoirs of an Invisible Man had a lot of potential, but it ultimately ended up being really boring, kind of irritating, and ultimately really disappointing.